Jerry Anderson in December year 2000. Jerry, you were born in Lufkin, right?
Yeah.
Did you live in Lufkin all your years growing up?
Growing up, we lived in Lufkin. Uh, well, not in town, but we lived at Hardy for a while, which was out in the country. In fact, we lived a mile and a quarter past Hardy. And when we moved out there, they were building the road that we lived on, and our nearest neighbor was about a half a mile away. And we had 7 acres, lived down in the bottom, and had a nice new house.
Who built that house, do you know?
Uh, Furman Palmore built the house.
Same one that built your older one?
Yeah,
Or your more recent one?
yeah.
And what is Hardy still a community today?
Yeah, that's where the paper mill is in Lufkin.
Okay. And what took you to Hardy?
My dad worked at the paper mill,
Okay.
and he wanted to be close to work, and he wanted to be out in the country. We lived in a bad neighborhood in town, and the area we lived in, there were black people who lived on the street behind us, and they wouldn't let their kids play over on our street because our street was considered a bad place.
Did you experience it as a bad place?
Yes.
What were some of the things that were bad about it?
Well, we had the only telephone in the neighborhood, and a lot of mornings, there are a lot of times during the day, there'd be somebody with blood on them, either been stabbed or beaten or something, coming to phone the sheriff. The sheriff had a permanent parking place in our front yard. He'd come to our house because that's where the people phoned from.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's almost a joke that Sheriff Billingsley had a parking place in our front yard. I've seen people being chased with screwdrivers, ice picks, butcher knives. Just interesting place to live.
What was it like living there as a kid? How old were you then?
We moved from there when I was 11. We moved there when I was 1. Well, I hid a lot. I knew all the good hiding places. I was a little bit shy and bashful anyway, not a brave person, and so I knew where to hide.
Were there any fun things to do around there?
Oh yeah. Even though it was a bad neighborhood, we still didn't lock the doors. We had the only telephone, so we never locked the front door because that way people could use the phone. The phone was hanging on the wall beside the door, and at night people would just come and reach in the front door and get the phone and call without even waking us up. And Daddy threatened them no long distance calls, but if his local call, emergency, they could do that. We played a lot of games, Piggy Wants a Signal, hide and seek, blind man's buff, and all that kind of stuff. And there were a lot of kids in the neighborhood.
Why did your family settle in that neighborhood?
Daddy got a chance to buy 2 little houses side by side. His folks needed a place to live, and we needed a place to live. And at the time, his dad was sick, and he later died, and was not able to buy his own place. So both of these little houses Dad could afford, so he bought them.
So you grew up at least close to your grandmother?
Yeah, Grandma Anderson was 1 tree away. We had a tree between us.
What was she like?
My dad always considered her scatterbrain because she could never get a meal ready on time. Didn't matter what it was never on time. She had some talent. She was a good needleworker. She could root anything. She would have a friend that had a new rose bush, and she would go on and on about the rose until they would give her a rosebud, sometimes with a 2-inch stem or something. she'd go home and cut the bud off and root the stem. Next year she'd have one of those bushes. And she loved petunias and grew lots of petunias. And
Where do you think she learned how to do that? Was that just a natural talent she developed herself, or?
I have no idea. Her dad was a good gardener, although he didn't do much of anything. He was a good gardener.
And who was her dad?
Jerry LaRue.
Okay, and you knew him too?
Oh yeah, he died when I was 8 years old, and I used to know all of his stories. In fact, I still know all of his stories.
What are some good stories he told?
Well, it's just stories about mainly cheating neighbors or pulling tricks on the neighbors.
He was cheating them, or they were cheating?
He was cheating.
Oh.
His my favorite one was where the family had been out of meat for a month. They didn't have any chickens to kill, and it was too hot to kill a hog. And they were had no bacon, didn't even have salt bacon, nothing, no meat. So he went hunting in this hot summertime. He always carried a bandana because he had a cap and ball rifle. And the old gun went click before it went boom. And if he's deer hunting, he had to have a big clearing so that he could keep the gun on the deer between click and boom, because when the gun went click, the deer would run. And he was a good shot. He'd put the bandana out on a stake, and if there's a little breeze, it'd flutter. Deer are very curious animals, and they'd come to see what that bandana was, and when they were smelling his bandana, he'd shoot them. Well, he put his bandana out in a clearing near the creek, Linson Creek, and figured they'd come to the creek to drink. And there was a deer trail through there. Didn't even see a squirrel, didn't see a robin, nothing. All day long. Watched his bandana all day, didn't see anything. He's on the way home, and he waited till he had to head home pretty fast because it's getting dark. And they heard a racket behind him, and it got out of the trail.
Mm-hmm.
And he counted 36 turkeys. He said the last one was the biggest old gobbler he'd ever seen in his life. And as they had rounded the bend out of sight, it dawned on him. He'd hunted all day, and he just let 36 turkeys walk within 3 or 4 feet of him. He said, I could have killed one with a gun barrel. I didn't even have to shoot him. And he said, I never did tell my family about it. Said next day we had no meat either. So that was maybe one on him.
Was he the one that was famous for syrup making too?
He was definitely a syrup maker.
And what kind of syrup did he make?
He made a French style syrup. He made 11-pound syrup, which was so thick you had to heat it up to get it out of the bucket. And the reason he made that kind of syrup was because his brother-in-law, who lived across the branch, made moonshine. And Grandpa loved his moonshine, but old Traywick wouldn't sell him any. He wouldn't sell it to anybody. It wasn't legal to sell liquor. So he didn't sell it. It was against the law. Of course, it's against the law to make it, but he thought he had a right to make it for his own use. But he loved that thick syrup. And Grandpa knew that he could always trade him some syrup for some whiskey. So he made thick syrup. And, well, being French, he kind of liked the French style syrup too. And he was famous for making syrup the easiest anybody ever could. The man was lazy, but he was intelligent.
Uh-huh.
He never skimmed his syrup. He said, let the trash float. He said it just keeps the temperature even in the pan. Once he pulled the cork, he had the syrup flowing all the rest of the day. And he didn't work at it. He didn't skim it. He said if you skim it, you knock the trash in the syrup, which is true. Just let the trash float on top. And you take the syrup out from the bottom of the pan anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And he never had to add juice to keep it from being too hot or that sort of thing. He kept an even fire. So, and that old thick syrup doesn't go to sugar. And it doesn't tend to mold. So it kept real good. And if you needed some, you could heat it up and get it out of the bucket.
Did you ever taste any of his syrup?
No, he was old he was 85 when I was born. He was no longer making syrup. I've tasted syrup that was similar to what he made, but I didn't know anybody that made 11 pounds. Most people made 8.
What does 11 pound mean?
11 pounds to the gallon.
Okay.
It's really thick. That's a dense, thick syrup. Most syrup's 8 pounds to the gallon.
And what is it made out of?
They use ribbon cane syrup, ribbon cane to make the syrup. They had some borers and things that came through, and very few people have ribbon cane anymore. There's some resistant varieties that they use, but it's not as sweet as old ribbon cane. And it made a good syrup.
Do you know how to make it?
I know the principle involved. I doubt I would be very good at it. I'd probably scorch it or something, but
Uh-huh. Which of his Trawick brother-in-laws had the moonshine?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know the guy's name. You could go through the property records and figure out, because it's the guy that owned the property next to him, but whoever it was.
And what part of Angelina County did they live in?
It was an area called Rocky Hill, and it had another name. It had to do with crossing on the railroad. This railroad track went right by Grandpa's house, and there was a Dutchman killed on the railroad, and they had this tradition of every once in a while seeing this guy walking along with his lantern, and some of the older people could tell you the name of the place, but it was a crossing on the railroad track.
What was his house like? Do you remember?
It was a 3-room shotgun house. They called it shotgun because you could fire a gun through the front door, and the shells would go out the back door,
Mm-hmm.
just straight through.
Was it one he'd built himself, or one his parents had had, or?
It was the one he was born in.
Okay.
And he had a house identical to it right across from the well, because his wife discovered that he was selling her property and he couldn't do it without her permission, so she insisted that he build her a house, so he built her one just like his, only new. And I've been in both houses. Ain't many. Grandpa's oldest daughter ended up with both houses, and she moved them to town for rent houses. And
So I guess they're not still there anymore.
no,
Okay.
they were moved probably when I was 12, 13 years old.
So he was of French origin?
Well, LaRue, yes, he is French.
Did he think of himself as being of French origin, or?
I never heard him say.
Okay.
No indication at all.
What did he look like?
He was a small man. Kind of almost a smirky expression on his face most of the time. He looked kind of mischievous, and he was.
Mm-hmm.
I guess he had a right to that. When his daddy died, his daddy was 98. He was 36 years old, so that means his dad was 62 when he was born. And so he had been raised by an older couple, his parents.
Mm-hmm.
He had an older brother who was older than him quite a bit. he came along at a natural time. Evidently, they only had the two boys, and the other one was James LaRue, and he was a doctor,
Medical doctor?
medical doctor. In fact, I met a lady that was delivered by him, Eustace. And when cocaine came out the first time, he used it and gave it to other people around Huntington. He was a doctor at Huntington. And he got hooked on cocaine, and he was out of his mind for about 3 years. And he finally cleared up, but nobody would come to him as a doctor, so he had to go somewhere else. So he went around Athens, and I know he was at Eustis. There's some LaRues over there. There's a community, LaRue, and that's from his family.
So he had a wife and children, but you didn't know anything about him?
No.
Did your grandmother have any brothers or sisters?
You mean Mama Anderson?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. There was Joe, her brother, who was a county commissioner around Huntington, did road work and that sort of thing. There was Minnie, her older sister, who married several times, and people thought she was very wealthy, but she was just very good with her money. She wasn't poor, but and she's very meticulous. She'd buy a car and never sit on the seat. She always sat on a clean sheet. Every day she'd go out and put a new clean sheet in her car and new papers in the floorboard of her car. The yesterday's newspaper was today's floor mat, and her house was full of doilies and lace and whatnots. The kids were afraid to break like me. I usually sat on her porch because I was afraid I'd break something. These were expensive porcelains and things, and I didn't want to take a chance on breaking them.
Did she let you ride in her car?
I rode in her car one time when my dad carried her to Magnolia to see her sister, Goodson, whatever her name was. I can't even think of her name right now, but she was Goodson anyway.
Do you remember what kind of car she had?
That car was a 36 Ford Coupe, black, and I remember it because in '53 she was buying a new Chevrolet, and I tried to get my dad to buy the car from her. She was getting $250 trade-in on it, and I said, "Daddy, it's worth a whole lot more than that." He said, "Boy, you can't even drive yet." I said, "I'll be able to drive next year, get my driver's license next year." And I said, "It's worth a lot more than $250. It only had 38,000 miles on it, and she had babied it the whole time. Like I say, nobody dared sit on her seat cover. She didn't. And it never been smoked in. The floor mat looked brand new because she kept clean newspaper in it, and it had one dent about as big as your fist on one fender. And my dad wouldn't buy it, and she traded in on the new Chevrolet, and it was on a used car lot. And they wanted more for the Ford than she had paid for the Chevrolet, which is what I told my daddy to start with. Somebody got it and painted it white, and they did change motors, and it had a little flathead Ford, and they put a more modern engine in it, and painted it white, and drove it for years. Every time I saw it, I thought, Daddy could have bought that for $2.5.
So your dad wasn't very good at taking your advice?
My dad has never taken my advice that I remember.
How old were you when you started offering it?
Pretty young. The only thing my dad took was my help starting his lawnmowers and garden tractors. He never could crank a motor vehicle. And a keep anything going. And sometimes on the motor vehicles, I would have to give him advice too. You know, Daddy, I remember a few years before he died, his last car, the seats were all cracking up, and he said, "I don't know what I'm gonna do." He said, "I can't afford, new seats and all that." I said, "Well, have you ever thought about seat covers?" He never had. He bought him a set of seat covers.
Oh, so he took your advice.
He did take my advice on that.
Uh-huh.
We had a garden tractor that I never could figure out how he could flood the thing because it had a magneto on it and it would throw a 2-inch blue spark. And I believe he could have cranked it on diesel.
Mm-hmm.
And he'd have it flooded. I never could figure that out. I'd go out there and crank it. And I started cranking his garden tractor for him when I guess I was 8 years old. Yeah.
So who taught you how to do that?
I've always had a mechanical inclination of some sort. Nobody ever taught me. When I was a kid, I used to fix the neighbors' bicycles. I was the next to the youngest kid in the neighborhood, but I would fix any problem on a bicycle for 25 cents. Back then, 25 cents was a 6-pack of Cokes or 2 trips to the movies and nickel left over. And so if the brakes were giving them trouble or well, whatever problem they had, I would rebuild even a new departure rear end on a bicycle for a quarter. And most of the kids couldn't even put one together. And I'd take it apart. That worked pretty good for a while, but we had a small house and I had cans of bicycle parts soaking on the front porch in coal oil and kerosene. And Mother got tired of it, and I came home one day from school and my cans were kicked out into the yard. Mother had just kicked them off the porch, and I had bearings and bicycle parts all over the yard. And I finally found enough to put these 3 kids' bicycles back together, and that ended my career as a bicycle mechanic.
So they didn't like your business.
Well, it wasn't that I didn't do good. I did that. It's just that my mother objected.
Right.
She didn't want kerosene on the front porch.
Does sound a bit like a fire hazard.
Well, it wasn't a fire hazard. She just thought it didn't look very neat with a bunch of syrup cans full of bicycle parts soaking on the front porch and torn up bicycles sitting around in the yard waiting for me to finish them.
Did you have your own bicycle then?
Yes. And one of the reasons they let me work on theirs is because we'd have contests of coasting, and I could outcoast everybody else. And the secret was to not tighten your bearings too tight, leave them just a little loose, but keep good lightweight grease on them all the time. And I could outcoast them.
This was on a flat surface?
No, this was down called Morgan Hill. You just start from a dead stop, side by side, and see who could coast the furthest. The hill was a quarter mile long downhill, and then you'd coast as far as you could from there.
And what road is this now?
It's on Highway 59 and going down to Mill Creek.
So there wasn't as much traffic then, I guess.
No, and the road was up that hill was really crooked because the loaded trucks couldn't just go straight up the hill then. They can now. And the road switched back and forth, so the little hill now doesn't seem very long, but then it wandered around enough. There was probably 4 or 5 bends in it then, and it's just straight road now.
How old were you when you got your first bike?
I was in 5th grade, and so I guess that's 11 years old.
How did you get it? Was it a present or did you buy
Christmas
it?
present. That's interesting too. Middle of the night, my dad woke me up and he said, if you want this bicycle in the morning, you're gonna have to help me put it together. He didn't know that there were left hand and right hand pedals, and he had been working and working trying to get a right-handed pedal on the left hand side, and
Uh-huh.
it just wouldn't screw in. The threads were backwards, and so
So you were happy to oblige.
I was happy to put my bicycle together.
Had you wanted one for a long time before that?
Oh yes, my brother and I were the last ones in the neighborhood to get a bicycle, and wanted one for a long, long time, and finally got it. Bicycles were very expensive then. I think the one we got cost $52,
Mm-hmm.
and that doesn't sound like a great deal, but back then, Dad on a good week was probably making 20.
Uh-huh.
So, and regular week probably making 15. So it's 3.5 weeks work,
Mm-hmm.
maybe a month's wages for a bicycle. When he bought me one, he bought my brother one, so that was 2 months' wages. But we got our bikes.
How old were you when you started contributing to the family's finances?
I don't know that I ever did.
Oh, okay.
Never had to do that.
Did riding your bike ever earn you any money, like a paper route or anything like that?
No.
So it was just for fun and transportation?
It was just fun. Well, like I say, I moved from that community when I was 11,
Mm-hmm.
so almost 12. And I made money riding my motor scooter, but never on my bicycle.
What was Christmas like when you were growing up? What kind of traditions did you have in your family?
Well, we always cut our own tree. We found a tree. It's usually pine.
Any particular kind of place you went?
Just some old abandoned field usually.
Mm-hmm.
In East Texas then there were a lot of old cotton fields that had been abandoned and that have a lot of little pine trees on that the tree was well branched because old field pine tends to do that, and so we cut one of those. They had very little value.
Mm-hmm.
And well, behind our house was an old field called the Singletary field, and they didn't care whether we cut them back there or not, so we cut them. And for Christmas, usually got one present, and well, I got some other presents too, but it's clothes and little candy. Mother thought that Christmas ribbon candy was wonderful stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I always got some ribbon candy. I never did care much for it, but she loved it. And Daddy always bought a box of oranges and a box of grapefruit.
Uh-huh.
And so we'd have fruit. And that was Christmas.
How long before Christmas Day would you go cut the tree?
Mother didn't like to put the tree up early, so it's usually Christmas Eve or the day before when we cut the tree.
And then how long would you keep it?
Mother would throw it out the day after Christmas,
Right.
usually. She didn't care a whole lot for pine needles in the house. We had a small house anyway.
How did you decorate it?
We had some bought lights. I think we had one string of bought lights, and we had some icicles, and a red garland and a green garland. We never did do that stringing popcorn bit. We
Uh-huh.
always, when we popped popcorn, we ate it.
Mm-hmm. Did you have any gatherings with other family members around Christmas time?
Usually on Christmas Eve, the Goodman family would get together.
Mm-hmm.
They do that while most of the people would go put the presents under the tree for the kids. In fact, we called it pull names. We'd pull somebody's name to give a present to, and a small present. And we'd meet somewhere, Granny Goodman's or somewhere.
Mm-hmm. What schools have you gone to?
Elementary elementary school, I went to Central Ward in Lufkin, and later taught there. I went to the old junior high, which was built in 1903, and the basement had been converted to classes, which was kind of bad in a way because the windows were level with the soil, and it wasn't lawn anymore, it's all soil. They had 700 and something kids going to school there, and there was no grass, none whatsoever. I mean, not one sprig. And when the wind blew, the dirt would just blow in the basement windows. Went to the old high school, and then we got a new high school while I was a junior over on Denman, and went there, and we thought it was wonderful, and even had some air conditioning. And then I went to Lon Morris, went there 1 year, went to SFA and graduated there in 61 with BA, majored in history, minored in English. Went to Goliad and taught. I went to University of Houston for a year postgraduate and got a teaching certificate in history. And Katie taught at James Bowie Elementary. Then we went to Goliad. I taught school there, but I was hired to teach history, but when I got there it was a trick because they assigned me to teach elementary language arts. And but I went ahead and got elementary certification. I went to took a course at Beeville Junior College from Texas A&I. I took classes at Stephen F. Austin in the summer and got an elementary certification. I took the graduate record examination and made the highest score that ever had at the testing facility on the math section. The dean at SFA convinced me that I needed to get a math degree, so I started working on a math degree, but I couldn't handle it. All the other students had a lot of background, and the only thing I'd ever had was high school algebra. I made it through my geometry and my calculus, but I got the matrix theory algebra, and I couldn't handle it. And so I went ahead and got a master's then in education. I got it in 71 at Stephen F. Austin.
You were teaching all that time?
Not all the time. I've worked at Southland Paper Mills for a couple of years. And I was night watchman there. And, which was interesting. A lot of times I'd walk a double and then, which was walking 32 miles in 16 hours and then go take a math course in the morning, get off at 7 o'clock and be in class at 8. And that may be one reason I couldn't handle the course.
Yeah, that'd be tough.
I had the guy that was always supposed to come in to relieve me was buddies with my boss's son, and he often was sick. He had an accident once and got charged with DWI while he was too sick to go to work. And he and the boss's son were both hurt in the accident, but he had phoned in sick, and he'd just gone somewhere drinking. But then, during that time, I took classes at Angelina Junior College. I've taken courses at University of Texas at Tyler. Then, when I went into the ministry, I went to Bright and got a Master of Divinity there.
Had you started a course of study before that?
I went to course of study 2 years, learned more in course of study than I did in seminary.
And course of study was at Perkins then?
Yes.
Or- okay.
And it was paid for fully. I had to buy my own paper, and that's about it, paper and pencils. Room and board, even travel to and from school was paid for. All I had to do was, like I say, buy my paper and pencil. And went to seminary, and while I was in seminary, I had all 3 kids in college. And by a miracle of God, we made it through. All 3 of them have a degree, and I got my degree.
Going backward in time to elementary school, how do you think your days in elementary school differ from elementary school today?
Well, discipline was different.
In what ways?
We wouldn't have dared do most of what the kids do today. I remember in 3rd grade, I had a teacher that if you wadded up a piece of paper, you had to stay in during playtime, and we had playtime then, not PE. You had to stay in during playtime and pour all the paper out of the trash can, straighten it all out flat on the floor, show it to her, then fold each piece of paper 3 times and set it in the bottom of the trash can. In fact, she didn't allow you to throw paper in the can. You couldn't even drop it in the can. You had to set it in the can. You had to put it all the way to the bottom and then turn loose of it. And most of the teachers weren't quite that strict, but they would make a mountain out of a molehill. But I understand what they were doing. They never did have any mountains. Everything was only a molehill. You didn't dare do anything bad, because if they were so upset over the little things, what would they be like on a big thing?
Mm-hmm.
So, some of our books had colored pictures in them. And we normally didn't have a classroom library unless the teacher had books. In fact, the school, the elementary school I went to didn't have a library. We had a film strip machine. We thought it was really privileged to have it. Didn't have a movie machine of any sort. But we did have music.
Mm-hmm.
Had a good music teacher.
Who was your music teacher?
Ms. Lennard. She'd had polio, and you wouldn't believe that she could play the piano. Her fingers were smaller than it should have been, and her hands were a little deformed, but she could play the piano, and she had to walk on crutches. And she went from classroom to classroom teaching music. One period a week you'd be in the auditorium,
Mm-hmm.
but most of the time she would come to your classroom, and so a kid would have to carry her stuff from class to class. But that was always a privilege to get out of the room anyway.
Sure.
I never did get to carry her stuff. One of the disappointments of my childhood.
How many years did you have her as a teacher?
Well, 6.
Okay. And in all those years, you never got to carry her?
Never got to carry stuff.
Why was that? Everybody
I
else
don't
was
know.
faster, or?
No, I guess it never was a teacher's pet. Hers or the regular classroom either. I know I never was in the regular classroom.
Some kids today at school have uniforms. Did you have uniforms?
No, I started school during World War II, and if you had clothes, you were blessed.
Uh-huh.
Forget any uniformity. Some of the kids wore knickers who'd been out of style for years, and but they wore them because somebody had them back in the closet and
Mhm.
couldn't get clothes during World War II, so they started wearing them again. You just wore whatever you could get. I remember the first time I got a pair of store-bought breeches. I guess I was in 3rd grade, and I got a pair of blue jeans. And they finally were available on the market again. I think Mother paid $1.25 for those things, which was a bunch of money. But I'd hounded her. I wanted a pair of blue jeans. Most of the other boys had blue jeans by then.
So is that what you normally wore to school, blue jeans and?
I wore blue jeans and a shirt. Mother usually made my shirts. My grandfather had a dairy, and so she could get feed sacks free. And she was good seamstress. And she'd make my little cotton shirts. And she starched them very heavily. My daddy wanted everything starched heavily. And I hated it because wind will not blow through a shirt that's starched heavily. They were hot. And besides, they scratched me.
Mm-hmm.
And I finally got to quit once. She looked and she said, "Jerry, there's blood on your shirt." And I said, "Yeah, this shirt cut me." And she looked, and sure enough, I was cut under the arm by the shirt. And so she quit starching my shirts. They didn't look good on me anyway. I was a little fat boy and I sweated a lot. And I couldn't keep my shirt tail tucked in, and I always ended up dirty and wrinkled, and didn't matter whether they were starched or not. Might as well not starch them. In fact, I was the fattest kid in my grade.
Did they make fun of you?
Not a whole lot. I wasn't good at fighting, but I was also, there was nobody in the class taller than I was. And I didn't realize that I couldn't see good enough to fight. But if I got my hand on you, you were mine. I could get on top of you and you weren't getting up. I could wrestle. And in fact, I've helped boys down 3 or 4 years older than I was. If I got on top, I was on top.
So you needed glasses then and didn't know it or couldn't afford them?
Didn't know it. Had no idea. I didn't know other people could see better than I could. And when I was in junior high, 7th grade, I had a coach. I didn't like him, but he did me the favor. He moved me to the back of the room, and it's no long room. It's no Army barrack. And I told him, "Coach, I can't see the board from back here." And he said, "That's what I thought. Go get you some glasses." So I went to TSO and got me a pair of glasses, and my goodness,
The world was
I
different.
could see everything. And it's almost scary. And, so I wore glasses from then on.
Who were your best friends in your early years of school?
Well, in 1st grade, had a little boy by the name of Roy Fisher, and he got typhoid fever toward the end of the school, and we didn't see him the last couple of months. And next year he came back with a scar on his neck where he had typhoid fever. And then we called him Shorty, but his name was Dixon Stovall. Was my best buddy then from then on. In the 5th grade, I buddied up a little bit with Corky Callahan. Corky always wanted to beat me wrestling. And so we wrestled play period every day, and I beat him every day.
You a lot bigger than he was?
I was bigger, and he was wiry. But I guess I was more experienced at it. He didn't beat me. I made sure he didn't beat me. And he was convinced he was gonna beat me, but he never did.
What kind of things did you do with your friends besides wrestle?
Well, at home, we made stilts and walked on stilts. We had vaulting poles. We'd vault across the creek. I built tree houses in the trees. We had sawmills down the street, and we could go uh, play chase and hide and whatever among the lumber stacks after the sawmill shut down for the day. And Mother didn't want us down there, so we had to keep it from her, but it didn't mean we didn't go.
Sounds familiar.
And they had lumber stacked everywhere. Good places to hide.
Mm-hmm.
And we rode our bicycles once I got a bicycle. I had a lake about a mile away, the Lufkin City Lake, and we could go over there and fish. And we crawfished in the branch. And in fact, Daddy had a cousin that'd give me a nickel apiece for crawfish.
Which cousin was that?
It was one of the Brookshires.
Is that for his grocery store?
No. It was different Brookshires. Actually part of the same family. It was different Brookshire. And it was to put on his trot lines to catch catfish. And
So who taught you how to fish?
my dad taught us to fish. My dad was wise about fishing. He carried us as kids to a dug pond that had nothing to hang a hook on. There were no trees, really not even grass around it yet, and a bunch of little bitty perch. He wouldn't even carry him a hook, and he'd let us fish. We'd catch 50, 60 of those little perch apiece, and Mother would clean them and cook them, and we'd eat them. And so we thought we were really, really hot shot fishermen. It was one of those deals, one drag of the seine, we could have gotten as many fish as that.
Uh-huh. But you didn't know that.
No, we enjoyed it. And we got to fishing that way. My mother loved to fish.
Mm-hmm.
And Daddy loved to fish. Mother was better at it than Daddy was. And Daddy tried harder. Mother didn't really try. She's just better at it.
Looking back on your childhood, is there anything you did that you think was really dumb and you're sort of amazed you survived?
I did a lot of dumb things. Well, I was about 20 feet up a tree once, and we'd ride these slender saplings down to the ground, and this one wasn't that slender. In fact, it's out in the old Singletary field. It's old field pine, and so I pulled on the top real hard to see if I could ride it down, and the top broke off, and I rattled down through the limbs and hit the ground and had the breath knocked out of me. And I was about 11 then. I had an 8-year-old with me. I tried to get him to kick me in the back to break my diaphragm loose so I could breathe. And he was scared to kick me because I was bigger than he was. And I finally got him to kick me. He finally kicked me right about the time I was turning blue and passing out. And I got my breath back. And that probably should have hurt me badly. When I was 8 years old, I decided to swim across the city lake. And I knew my brother would tell on me, so I did it when nobody else was around, which was the dumbest time to do it.
Uh-huh.
I got out in the middle of that lake and I just decided I couldn't go any further. And I looked, and it was as close to the bank I was headed towards as it was the one I was coming from, and I decided I might as well drown closer to the bank I was going to. I swam across the lake. I never was so proud when I hit that mossy bottom, and I got out of it. But I learned to swim the year I was 8. That's the first year I learned to swim.
Did
And
you
I
just
swam
do that by
across the
trial
lake.
and error, or did someone teach you?
My grandfather had a little dug pond that wasn't deeper than we were. We could touch bottom anywhere. In fact, it's where we fished. And I just learned to put my face down and swim with my face down, and before long I could swim. But I was so fat I was buoyant anyway, so swimming wasn't any problem.
Uh-huh. When you were a child, who did you feel understood you the best?
I guess my mother was closest, but I wasn't too sure about her. I pretty well felt alone. I felt neglected and alone. And, my brother would make a C and they'd brag on him, and I'd make an A and they wouldn't brag on me. And mother later said, well, you know, we knew you were going to make good grades. Well, I still should have been bragged on a little bit.
Uh-huh.
I would make my shoes last. In fact, I have bad toes now from making my shoes last long. They ruined my feet. I have hammerhead toes from it. And Willard would go through pair after pair. If he didn't like them, he'd go wading in them to ruin them. We were real poor, and I tried to make my stuff last.
So you felt the need to be the responsible one.
Yeah, I always try to be responsible. I didn't like for him to borrow my bicycle because he didn't take care of his. The reason he needed to borrow mine is because his wouldn't run. And he was just likely to run them off into a pond or something as anything. Do whatever he wanted to. And he didn't take care of his stuff, and he didn't take care of mine.
How long was your father off during the war?
He was gone 23 months, and that was a long time. It was long because mother was sick most of the time.
Uh-huh.
And she was in the hospital off and on the whole time. Well, toward the end she wasn't. She even had her death certificate signed twice while he was gone. The Red Cross was supposed to have gotten him back, but they never did. He didn't even know mother had been sick till the war was over.
Must have caused a lot of anxiety for you as a little kid.
Yes, plus I went to school from a different direction lots of mornings. I stayed with relatives and whatever because mother was sick. And so, yes, I had deep anxieties over that. My dad was gone and my mother was sick. And mother was worried about dad, and I knew that, and you know, I knew they were killing people over there, and he was in the war, so I didn't know whether he was going to come back either.
Did you know any of your friends or other kids in the neighborhoods whose dads were over there and didn't come back?
I had one little boy in my class whose dad was killed, and that probably didn't help a whole lot.
Oh.
I had another little boy in the class whose dad was killed in a railroad accident, so there's two of them that didn't have dads because of death. And I was a real insecure kid anyway. I don't know if that might have gone back when I was born. I beat my mother home from the hospital, and the neighbors raised me for the first 3 months, and their name was Baird, and I don't know what happened, but my folks and them never had anything to do with each other after that. I was grown and married before I even found out about it. And the way I found out about it, Mr. Baird ran a saw sharpening shop, and I was fixing to carry some saws over, get them sharpened by him, and Dad found out, and he said he wanted to go with me. And so I don't know what he was going to protect me from or what, but that's when I found out they'd kept me for the first 3 months of my life.
Your mother had bad health in the childbirth or something?
Yes, I was weighed over 10 pounds and that's a breech birth. I started as home delivery and ended up as hospital delivery. And they finally turned me around and delivered me as a forceps baby. And mother said I had a knot on my head as big as my head for 3 months from it. And it's pretty brutal delivery evidently. And and Willard was a little bit puny, so they kept him and took care of him. He had pneumonia and I don't know what all. And he was little bitty.
Mm-hmm.
He always resented my size. And most of the fights we had to do with me being bigger than him.
Mm-hmm.
And but I couldn't whip him.
What's your age difference?
18 months. But I could whip him if I was mad at him. But if I was really mad at him, I couldn't catch him.
Mm-hmm.
And he was my brother, and I didn't really want to hurt him most of the time,
Uh-huh.
which gave him the advantage.
Right.
When I was mad enough I wanted to hurt him, I couldn't catch him. So, never did whip him. I knocked him down when I was 13, he was 15. That's the last fight we had. First time I ever knocked him down. I think he decided it was time to quit fighting me.
Mm-hmm.
I always felt like he always started them. And looking back, I still think he always started them.
Uh-huh.
I wasn't going to start a fight with somebody I wasn't going to whip.
Yeah.
I had more sense than that. I didn't enjoy pain.
It's getting sort of late, so how about if we try this again another time? That'd be
All
okay?
right. Sounds good to me.